Welcome back to the Voice of Business podcast. We're here at Bennett's in their beautiful furniture showroom. And big thanks to Janice at Adigsky Media for shooting and producing this podcast. And my guest today, we've got Bill McNabb, the Executive Director of Brock Mission.
Yeah.
Thanks so much for joining me.
I'm glad to be here.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about what it is you do. You've got quite a few different services. Explain a bit about Brock Mission and what you guys are up to.
Sure. Well, Brock Mission is a local organization. It's a grassroots it came out of just individuals within the community of Peterborough who recognized an issue back in the late 80s around homelessness, particularly men, because there are just absolutely no services, certainly not crisis services for men. So they took it upon themselves to actually create a shelter, which was unusual for a smaller community at that time. I mean, now it's everywhere, but at the time it was mostly, London, Ottawa, Toronto, Hamilton that had shelters. But they recognized that need and just started off with buying a building. They just came together, got a mortgage, so it was all on them. There was no government funding or any grants or anything available at that time, and created this 24/7 access to shelter and meals.
Wow.
For men specifically.
And you've been with them for a considerable amount of that time.
Yes. Thanks for bringing that up. Yeah. Yeah, I have. It was around about 5 years before I started.
Okay.
And I was recruited to come on board because they were struggling. They had 5 different executive directors in 5 years and asked me to take it on, and I agreed to do that. And in my conversations with my wife, it was like, oh, this will be a good 5-year stint and then we'll move on. And 30 years later, here I am.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Fair enough. And we've talked a number of times about the different challenges and stuff around this. And you've talked before about the population that you were dealing with when it first opened. Things changed dramatically, especially in the late 90s as the psychiatric institutions closed and the needs of your clients changed. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about that transition.
Sure. Well, I think if we talk about what was offered at the time when Brock opened, it was essentially just a roof over your head at night, meals during the day. There was an expectation, though, to go out and look for work, look for a place to live. We were supposed to only be taking individuals who were able-minded, able-bodied, basically independent, but just had no place to live at night. To provide that kind of shelter. So there was not a lot of supports, we didn't have a lot of issues around behaviors, things like that. Addiction was definitely in that mix. Most shelters, particularly male shelters, were set up, and they were also called hostels at the time. We weren't allowed to call them shelters because shelters was reserved for victims of violence shelters. So in that case, it was, I would say, when I started, probably 75% of the population that we served were people that it was a bad point in their life.
Yep.
So it wasn't long before they could, get their feet back on the ground and kind of move forward. And then in the late 90s that you referred to is when those hospitals closed. We had a lot of insurgents, and not just Peterborough, but right across the province. Shelters were inundated with individuals who had really serious mental health issues. And shelters just were not equipped or staffed to deal with that at that time.
Yeah. And how do you deal with high needs individuals, right? Like I'm sure it's a longer process than what it was when you first started, right? When you have more wraparound services for people.
Yeah, and I think the issue is that shelters are not designed, obviously, to cater to every individual needs. You're talking about congregate living.
Yeah.
So you have, you essentially now we have 30 beds. We started with about 12. Back in the 80s, and it went up to 27 during what is that, like the late 90s. And I think what happened in all that mix is just that people had expectations that we couldn't meet as a shelter, because you're really just doing crowd control at that point. So you have 30 individuals, many don't know each other, everybody has different needs, and so it's just not the best environment to help anybody move forward in.
Yeah.
So it's really just, it's supposed to be that emergency. Tonight you have a place to stay. Let's figure out what to do next.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And now you work with a lot of other organizations, I would assume, because this is not something we can deal with all on our own. So tell us a little bit too about that broader community here in Peterborough that your organization works within to help support people in our community.
So again, from a shelter perspective, we're supposed to just be looking at basic needs. Sorry. And that means that we have all of these other needs that we can't handle. So we're always looking at, the mental health agencies, at the time we started, it was a separation between mental health and addictions. It's great that the government has recognized that they should be one and the same, not treated individually. Because we found ourselves actually trying to work with clients who, and clients for lack of a warmer name, who we would say we're dealing with addictions, but then an addictions agency would say, well, no, it's mental health. But then a mental health agency would say, no, it's addiction. So the fact that they brought the two together is really helpful moving forward. But that's obviously a huge component of that we need. And also working with a hospital, working with police. Those are sort of important relationships that we need to have. And they're not always easy. I think, again, often shelters are quite honestly used as dumping grounds for individuals that nobody else knows what to do with. So we're kind of left with that, oh dear, we have someone we have to expel. We have to discharge because we can't handle their needs, but then we look like the bad guys. So that's always a rough thing. So it's trying to build those relationships to stop that thought process and saying, no, this person just needs, more intensive care. Well, and you do have quite a few additional services, like you've got healthcare services for people out there too. I mean, a dramatic change from 30 years ago for sure. So we have the primary care clinic that was started by Leanne Quinn, formerly with Armed Services, and she's a nurse practitioner who she saw a need. She saw a need with the population that we serve. She was brought to, was actually social services that brought her to Brock, and we said, we got more than a broom closet, which is what she was asking for, and created this clinic, which, when we do something like this, we're never sure what the outcome's going to be, but it's been huge, because they really are dealing with the primary care, so it's not always using eMERGE to deal with the crisis, but actually trying to get people to start looking after themselves. And then those relationships develop, they're clinical people, so they're really getting them engaged. And that's made a dramatic difference in the population we serve.
Now, one of the areas that I get really excited about is your housing work that you do, which again, it's not, these are people who are not the easiest to place into just regular housing. You can't just rent them an apartment and expect success out of it. And so tell us a little bit about the units that you have currently and what the services are and that.
So, well, one of the things I didn't mention too is our development over the years has also been to create, when I was hired, my mandate was to create a parallel service for women. So not women who are in violence, but women who are homeless for other reasons. So we created Cameron House. Then it's funny how, things happen, crises happen, but we can have opportunities grow out of that. So Cameron House went from single women and women with children to being just single women. Because our funding was related to how many beds we were serving, that actually caused a financial crisis for us. Looking at, okay, what do we do? Like, we can't close down a women's shelter, what should we do? Then we had the opportunity with funding to create 8 apartments attached to the shelter for women who have been chronically homeless. That's where it kind of started. And then with Brock, with the men's shelter in the new building, we were able to put in 15 units to do what we call semi-independent living programming. And what's great about that is, I'll give you one example of an individual that was staying with us who's recently moved into less intense care. He had been on the streets since I started at Brock. And so I don't think he ever experienced what it was like to actually live in a stable environment. So this was a great opportunity for him to be not in the shelter where you're living with everybody else in a room and blah, 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 but actually have his own space. It's kind of like a studio apartment. And with having his own space, it was just that opportunity to work through, and for him to work through, what are your next steps? What else do you want? And have a taste of what it was like to live independently. And it made all the difference in the world. An opportunity not like that, I'm sure he'd still be in a shelter environment, using shelter as housing kind of thing.
People need supports, right? Like
exactly. And I think the hybrid that we have with having these units attached to the shelters, we have to be staffed 24/7, so there's some cost effectiveness.
Of course.
But it also means we do in fact have eyes on these individuals around the clock, because things don't happen Monday to Friday, 8 to 4 or 9 to 5. They usually happen over holidays, at night, on weekends. And so that's our opportunity to engage and help somebody just figure out how to stay stable.
No, 24/7 staffing is a lot of work, I'm sure, right? Like, you just look at one
insanity.
position, now you replicate that,
That's right.
and the amount it takes to fill that. And you're also looking at expanding some of that housing too. So we saw a proposal for, I think it was up to 50 units.
50 units. kind of to parallel what we're doing, because we
Yeah.
realize the success of what's
Yeah.
happening with these units, but it's like, what's next? Because
Yeah.
we have individuals who they need the support, they need a certain amount of rules, I guess you'd call it, but just eyes on
Yeah.
for a longer period of time.
Yeah.
But also still to have more independence.
Yeah.
So in the shelter environment, obviously we have rules to try to keep everybody as happy as they can as
Yeah.
a collective. This is an opportunity then to get out on your own and start doing your own thing, but still have some fairly intensive supports.
Yeah.
Not being just, because I'll be honest with you, what we see happen a lot is it's the recidivism into shelter.
Yeah.
So people move out, live on their own, they seem well, but they don't, like within 3 or 4 months, they're back into the shelter because they just aren't quite stable enough to keep going.
Yeah.
They just need that extra help. So it's that, yeah.
And there seems to be a lot of interest in providing this type of housing. And I'm working with chambers of commerce across Ontario on this, and we're always looking for things that can be replicated. And it's difficult with the not-for-profit sector because so much of it is the actual volunteers who put blood, sweat, and tears into their role, right? Well, volunteers or people who are paid, but not necessarily, paid what they maybe should be for some of their work in this, because it is so intensive. And so I'm wondering how much of what you're doing are things that could be picked up and replicated in other communities, like this housing project or other services that you have, again, your healthcare program, that kind of thing, and how much is really just dependent on who you have at your disposal at that time to be able to push that stuff through.
So, I mean, I don't think we're unique. I think this is something that is happening even like across the country, like sort of looking at more innovative ways of providing housing. I think, so I wouldn't ever say we're the only ones doing this sort
Yeah.
of thing, but I think it is about encouraging each other in other communities, like what were your setbacks, what were your
Yeah.
roadblocks. Absolutely, you're dependent on your community in terms of what they want to support. I
Yeah.
think without community support, you're not going to have a lot of success.
Yeah.
Because the other part of this whole puzzle is how do we ensure that individuals that we're serving are part of our community, and I think that's a big gap that I've witnessed over the years. It's just
Yeah.
it feels like it's becoming very much an us and them versus no, we're all in this together, and there needs to be mutual respect, not one-sided respect, but
Yep.
mutual respect.
Absolutely.
And I think that's part of what would be kind of interesting to see what's happening across the country in terms of that, working with the community to find balance.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And these issues, whether it's homelessness or addictions, it can be very overwhelming, right? Like, and I'm sure you've seen a large increase in clients over the last number of years. What do we need to be doing to really cut down those numbers so that we have those people reintegrating back with the rest of society and functioning in the way that they need to be, where they're getting good access to housing and safe and secure food and living a higher quality of life, right?
I think part of the issue is often what was referred to even in the early 2000s as this concept of continuum of care. So it's that all of the service organizations, whether it's volunteer-based or it's payment transfer agency with the province that's providing services, it's that we all need to work together so that an individual that's in that system is actually not just having everybody spinning.
Yeah.
So, that's part of the primary care. What's really helpful there is instead of people just going to emerge, where it's whoever you happen to get when you go into emerge, because they're only dealing with that immediate crisis.
Yeah.
We're now looking at the whole plan of, no, in primary care, we can now attach and go, oh, so you've been working with, this agency or that agency and help provide more information, and then just start working as a collective.
Yeah.
And then you're not wasting time, and you're also helping that individual navigate smoothly.
Yeah.
As opposed to, what generally happens, honestly, is they'll come to us and say, okay, they're thinking, this individual will come to us in crisis and go, what do they want to hear?
Yeah.
Versus we just want the truth.
Yeah.
Like, we're okay with whatever.
Yeah.
But just tell us the truth so we can work forward, versus you don't need to say what we need to hear.
Yeah.
So, they'll go to, for income security, and they'll say, what do they want to hear? So they'll tell them a story that relates to that. That's survival.
Yeah.
I'm not judging them by saying that.
Yeah.
They're trying to survive. So I think it's that continuum of care sort of eliminates all of that necessity, and we get down to the truth and the matter, and figure out how to help that individual work forward.
Yeah.
For better quality of life, as you said.
Yeah. Well, and ideally, we'd love to get it to a point where we're not just dealing with people at their points of crisis, right?
Exactly.
It's the worst for their health outcomes. It's the worst financially. Like we talked about, there's not being enough money in the sector to fund all the services. But when you're dealing with your mental health at the emerge, or your housing when it's finally become so insecure that you've ended up in a shelter, these are the more expensive and worst points to be dealing with it, right? So ideally, the more we can invest early on in primary health care and those sorts of things, we can avoid some of these situations.
Exactly, and it's a constant battle of how are we dealing with a large group of individuals in crisis when it's still about each person as an individual.
Yeah.
So it's trying to keep the individual piece to the puzzle, but we still have to come up with plans, which is why there is no one solution. I mean, I think we're fooling ourselves to think there could be.
Yeah.
It's that we need multiple solutions.
And
but
it's
we
never
need to
the
be
quick win
together.
that they're looking for,
no,
right?
No. Well,
here's 12 months worth of operational funding. Come up with a plan and solve homelessness and addictions, right?
And I think that's the issue with how the government's addressing the problem. I'll be honest with you. It's that they throw money from a political perspective. That's the easy go. Is that, we're investing X amount of millions of dollars into the homelessness issue. It's like, I look at it and go, but I have seen what happens. It's that you're telling agencies that you already work with, oh, we have this money available. You need to apply within the next 2 months, and you need to start 4 months after that. There's no way you can come up with a good plan in 6 months.
Yeah.
It's ridiculous.
Yeah.
And as you said, the 12 months, it's like you spend 3 months getting your program up and running. You run for 4 or 5 months, and then all that staff's wondering, are we going to have a job? So they're already looking for the next step for because they need to keep their housing.
Yep.
So it's just this vicious cycle of programs that come and go. And Brock's experienced the same thing. I mean, we had outreach workers and then the funding ends and we don't. And so I've become fairly stubborn in our operations to go, I am not changing how we do things for a program that now exists, but only for 12 months.
Yeah.
Because it's like, no, it has to be an add-on that we can easily let go, which isn't, there's no easy about it. But so we're not really necessarily fixing certain issues because we can't change things because of this sort of funding scheme that happens.
You see people getting very frustrated, right? And they spend all their time chasing those funding opportunities to keep the organization afloat, and I can only imagine how frustrating that is.
And that means there's a lot of money spent in bureaucracy, quite honestly. I mean, that's where I think that's my personal frustration, is just because it costs to do all that. So I'm not criticizing any organization that has somebody who just does full-time fundraising. It's like, what you have to.
Yeah. But you don't easily get a volunteer that wants to jump in and just do your administrative work.
Exactly. Yeah. That's rough.
So just sort of wrapping things up, what is it that drives you doing what you do? Like, where do you find the optimism? Where do you find the positives in what can be a very consuming area of work that you're in?
So it's a funny question because I usually answer with, well, I'm a little stupid and I'm a little stubborn at the same time, which isn't completely true. Well, the stubborn part is true for sure. But I think it's the challenge of recognizing that things are not going well.
Yeah.
And we are talking about a population of individuals who don't have a great voice. And even if people think they're speaking on behalf of that population, it's still the people that are the loudest. And my heart tends to reach out to those that don't have a voice at all. So they're bullied by their own peers, we'll call them. And that's just how it goes. So when you see that, it's like, nah, I can't give up now.
Yeah.
And it's never dull. So I never get bored, which is a good thing for me. And I had a friend who once told me many years ago, said, I think it comes down to the fact that you're addicted to chaos. So I'm kind of in the perfect job for that.
Fair enough. Which is why you've been there for 30 years now. It's a good fit.
Yeah. But it's up and down. I'm not going to lie. There are days when I do kind of go, what am I doing here? And the same with staff. But we now have a really good staff group that just seem to, I think COVID actually brought us together. Because we're kind of on our own during COVID. That was a really trying time, but it was just like, but if we don't do this, there's nobody else doing it. So we can't just walk away. But I think that brought us all closer. So we have each other's back. And there's no separate, my role's at the top, but it doesn't matter. It's our frontline workers who do all the real work. And so I respect them, and they have mutual respect, and it just keeps us all going.
Good.
And there's always, I do hope does reign eternal.
Yeah.
If you give up, you're done.
Yeah.
And I'm just, again, the stubbornness helps me get through those times.
Well, we appreciate your stubbornness and the work that you're doing, and we'd love to offer support wherever we can in your programming, and we're all here to try and build a stronger community for everyone, right?
Well, and that's the key, though.
Yeah.
It's that whole balancing act of we need a really wholesome community that has all aspects looked after.
Yeah.
So business needs to be supported because they're the foundation for the community.
Yeah.
So it's working back and forth.
Yeah. Well, thanks for joining me, Bill.
Okay,
Appreciate
well,
it.
thank you.